By the end of this video, you'll know how to use this time management tool so you can get more out of the time you spend studying. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this video is building on previous videos, so do check them out at some point. I briefly touched on what it was to enter the matrix in the previous video, but to elaborate on that, I gave some examples of how to interpret the dots on this graph. For instance, this dot is all about putting in very little effort to get extremely high marks. That might be something like brushing up on your excellent math skills just before the exam. If you have a skill for an exam that is in this particular sector of this quadrant, then you shouldn't really be worried about that particular thing. Instead, this is the area of this quadrant that you should be focusing on. It's stuff that gets you really high marks, but also requires a lot of effort. The reason why you should be focusing on these dots is because if you don't focus your time on these dots, they are going to drag down your overall mark, which means that your expertise in all of the other areas is just going to go to waste. I'm in a baking mood, so let's use a cake example. So imagine you are a master baker and you make pretty amazing cakes, like this one. However, you are hopeless at cutting cakes. So when you come to serve up this cake, you try to cut the cake, but you just ruin it. You decimate this cake. So when it gets to the plate to serve it to your friends, it looks something like this. It will still taste okay, but you've ruined your masterpiece. You've pulled down your exceptional talents at baking through your incompetence at being able to use a knife properly. We don't want this to happen to you, so now I'm going to go through how I applied this thinking of using this graph to my Oxford finals to help me prioritize what it is that I started to work on. I will be adding how I applied this for my GCSEs and my A-levels to the website, so do check them out if you would like some more practical examples for your own exams. So I read philosophy, politics and economics, and you're required to sit 8 exams for your degree, and each of those exams is 3 hours long. The 8 papers that I did for my Oxford finals were these ones. I knew which subjects I was good at and which ones I was not so good at based on my love for those subjects and how much work I got done when I was actually studying for those subjects. So to sketch out the first iteration of the graph, it would look something like this. This is where I would place the different subjects as dots on the graph. Japanese politics was by far the most straightforward for me, and history of philosophy was by far the most complex for me conceptually, so that has its place in the high effort, high marks category. Now we're going to redefine the dots. So upon doing this, I then took into consideration what the exams required of me, and by knowing the requirements of each of the exams, I knew how demanding each of the papers was going to be. This means I could replace the dots, which is reflected by the dots having shifted on the graph. Some of the papers required me to know more references than others, some of them required me to know more content, some of them required me to think more deeply. So this is, depending on what my skill set was and what I was better at remembering things, thinking hard about topics is more difficult for me. So this is reflected by the shift in the dots. This is because different papers required you to show different skills, and I knew which skills I was better at doing and what skills I was weaker at doing, so that means that I could shift the dots accordingly. For instance, I might have to remember references to academic texts, and maybe I'm not so good at remembering names, or I have to just remember more content, which means more dates and more case studies, or I might just have to think more deeply about more challenging questions, and that would shift the dots, particularly for, say, philosophy papers. To explain the shift in the dots a bit more, we have comparative government. This requires a hell of a lot of content, but I didn't think it was conceptually that challenging in comparison to the other ones. And then we have Japanese politics, which was about a manageable amount of content, and I found it really interesting, so I was pretty much on top of this paper, so that's why it's positioned here. History of philosophy required less content than the other ones, but it required far deeper thought, which means you need to think very deeply about the content that you do study, and that requires a lot of time. Then we have international relations, which actually had a hell of a lot of content, mainly because I was ill when I was meant to be studying for this paper, which means that I had this huge void of learning that I had to fill, which is why it's placed here. Now you can use all the dot placements to help manage your time, as I did. As I didn't want my weaknesses to drag me down, I went for the topics that were high effort, high marks, because they are the ones that were going to be my downfall in the exam if I don't address them now. So I began addressing them straight away, and then I will continue to work from there. This means that I work on the philosophy papers first, and then work my way through to eventually my favourite politics papers. So this final graph is incredibly useful. Before, I had no idea what it is that I should be doing, or in what order I should be doing it, but this makes it completely clear as to which dots I should be starting with and which dots I should be ending with. Of course, this is not perfect. First, you have to make sure you're putting in the effort and you're actually learning the material. This will help you get up the education mountain, but ultimately it's down to you whether or not you put one foot in front of the other. You also need to be aware of the progress that you're making in particular subjects, because as you make progress, the dots are going to shift, which means where you're spending your time will also change. For instance, you might study philosophy for about a week, and then suddenly you can write publishable essays, which means it becomes one of those low effort, high mark subjects, which means that it's completely shifted on your graph, so you should be focusing on a different dot. The main way in which I would keep track of my progress for the different papers that I was studying was I would just do past exam questions. I knew I was going to be judged against how well I could answer one of these questions, so the best way to test whether or not I could actually answer one of these questions was to give one a go. I would try some, get it marked, learn where I was doing well and where I wasn't doing so well, digest that feedback, and then improve. Do not try to prepare for your exams in a vacuum. Let your work breathe and test it against the closest thing you have to the real deal, which is a past exam question. For more details of everything I've said here and the transcript of this video, do check out the Odd Education website. We've also included some activities there so you can start learning more and being more effective in your studies. Please do join the conversation down in the comments below where other people are sharing their tips and concerns and helping one another study more effectively. Until next time, goodbye. Objective of this video is to teach you how to prepare for your exams without wasting your time, so we're going to improve your focus so you can get the most out of your learning.